Hi, everyone. Welcome to Lowe Connects. Just giving it a few more minutes for people to join from the waiting room. We'll begin shortly.
It's just in outer space.
Okay, so welcome again, everyone, to Lowe Connects. María Elena González in conversation with Dr. Jill Deupi. My name is Jody Seifer. I'm the curator of education at the Lowe Art Museum, and I'm really glad that you're here with us tonight. During the program, we invite you to type your questions in the chat feature. They're only going to be seen by the hosts and not the participants, but we'll do our best at the end to answer as many questions as possible if they're not already answered during the program. Also, at the end of the program, there'll be a link and a QR code to a survey. We really appreciate it if you take a few minutes to let us know your thoughts about the program. We do really read them and take them into consideration. Also, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the land that the University of Miami, of which the Lowe Art Museum is a part of, sits upon. The University of Miami acknowledges the ancestral and traditional territories of the Seminole Tribe of Florida, the Council of the Original Miccosukee Seminole Nation Aboriginal Peoples, and the Miccosukee Tribe of Indians of Florida, who are the original owners and custodians of the land upon which we stand and learn. I'd like to introduce our guest speaker and really thank her for being here, as well as Dr. Deupi for doing this talk for us tonight. Cuban-born artist María Elena González is an internationally recognized sculptor based in Brooklyn, New York, and the Bay Area of California. González interweaves the conceptual with a strong dedication to craft in her complex installations and poetic arrangements, exploring themes like identity, memory, dislocation, and our connection to nature. González's work can be found in numerous public collections, including the Kunstmuseum Basel, Switzerland, Museum voor Modern Kunst, Arnhem, the Netherlands, Museum of Art, the Rhode Island School of Design in Providence, Rhode Island, the Museum of Arts and Design in New York, and the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum in New York. And now I will turn the mic over to Dr. Jill Deupi.
Jill, you're mute.
Thank you. For once, that wasn't my mistake. Hi, everybody. Good evening. Thank you for joining us wherever you are, whatever time zone you're in. We're really delighted to have you with us. My name is Jill Deupi, and I have the extreme pleasure and privilege of serving as the Beaux-Arts Director and Chief Curator at the Lowe Art Museum, where I've been since 2014. And I equally have had the pleasure of knowing María Elena González for almost 20 years, which takes my breath away. I can't believe it's been that long. We first met at the American Academy in Rome almost 2 decades ago. So María Elena, I'm so happy to reconnect with you this evening, but also in the broader context, which is our Beyond the Sounds of Silence exhibition, which we will discuss a little bit in terms of your works on view there towards the conclusion of this conversation this evening. But I want to kick us off with a question for you about dislocation and identity. As Jody mentioned, you are Cuban American. You were born 2 years before the revolution in Cuba, and then you transferred or immigrated to the US with your parents and your brother when you were, I think, 11 years old. I know that some artists prefer not to really spend too much time thinking about the hyphen that is part of their cultural identity, African American, Cuban American, etc. I'm just curious to know, though, since those experiences do infuse your work in very, very different ways, how you see dislocation and identity as a practicing artist.
Wow, that's pretty loaded. And I'm going to start with a hyphen because it's been such a focus in a lot of essays and conversations. And whether we singularly do not think about it much, people don't let us forget it. And it's curious that when we're talking about the subject or the content of some of our work regarding, let's say, our interest, me in particular, in nature, it'll pop up like, and what does that have to do with your background? And, well, I don't know, it has to do with, me being human in nature, in the world, and my preoccupation with what we've done to it. So, I mean, that answers a little bit of how you started the conversation, Jill. But it is inevitable that our matrix of where we come from manifests itself in what we do and how we do. And whether one intentionally infuses our work with it or chooses to talk about it in our work, it inevitably comes out because it is who we are and where we come from.
And I love that idea of the matrix too, which also makes me think about memory, which again is one of those things that goes into our core essence and our being, whether we choose to embrace it or not. And we'll see some really wonderful examples of your work here in a little while. But it seems to me that memory is playing a role in your work. Can you reflect a little bit on the role that memory has played in your practice over the years?
Inevitably, when making something, I need to remember how I did it before. So just in the logistic part of it, how did I do that? So for me, the memory is like the external hard drive that contains a lot of information that you don't necessarily access all the time. But I remember this or I remember that in talking about particulars in a conversation and specificity of a moment. That's when I go back into what happened X amount of years ago. How did I feel? Where did I feel it? Because the where for me is very important, which is where architecture and how places in where we've resided are more significant than others. And that manifested itself in mnemonic architecture, which we'll look at later on. But I got more interested in memory regarding on how the brain works and how it decides that something is sharper or fuzzier or more clear or more important. And then I started reading a lot of stuff regarding the scientific aspects of the brain, the mnemonics of the brain and whatnot. And so it was a way to figure out how the instrument works.
It's fascinating. And because the world is so richly coincidental, my 15-year-old son this afternoon was enthusing to me, waxing poetic about memory palaces, which he had just learned about in one of his classes in school, which I was thinking about too, looking at your body of work, because architecture, which we are going to talk about here in just a moment, has clearly played such a role as well. But before we talk about architecture, I do want to talk briefly about 2003 when you were a Rome Prize recipient, because I do think it's, as I understand it, the experience you had there was rather different than what you had intended. And it does really speak to this idea of, to use your word, matrix and memory. Can you talk a little bit about what you had intended to do in Rome and what actually happened once you got there?
Yeah, it's there, specifically that we apply with a certain project to the Rome Prize. And once you're there, Rome has a way of enveloping you, and different things, it's like everything is so hyper accentuated. And what I ended up diverting from, like, to make the proposal short, it was to see how the wear and tear of visitors exhibited itself on certain pilgrimage sites. So that wear and tear was almost like a physical memory of the traffic that went before. But once I got to Rome, and then I started going to church, or the relics and the reliquaries. And this one in particular is a relic in San Lorenzo fuori le Mura of the slab where San Lorenzo was laid. And supposedly that stain on the marble was left of his fat draining into it because he was cooked to death. And the story goes, he was, turn me over because I'm well done on this side. So that's how Rome started. And then after doing a lot of research regarding these reliquaries, I started mapping it. And it started looking like the Hannibal Lecter tour of Rome. And that was like, a way to look at the barbarity of the martyrdom of the persecution. And, it's like things haven't changed that much. It's incredible, the brutality and the inhumanity that we still see today. And going through the relics and the reliquaries and the stories of the martyrs, it was such a parallel, because as you remember, when we were in Rome, Abu Ghraib happened, and we saw a lot of images, not just on the web, but printed in the newspaper that were incredibly, it was uncanny that I'm doing research of things that happened at the beginning of Christianity. And now I'm looking at something that's printed in 2003 and 2004 that are similar in brutality.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
San Lorenzo, so this piece was based on where the holes in the slab that he was laid on, and I made a plumbing piece out of it. It's called
Very powerful. What's the name of this work, María Elena?
Self-contained.
Self-contained. Fabulous. I think we have a few more images too of other works that were also inspired by and created in Rome. Can you talk a little bit about these shots, please?
I rarely use color, but being in Rome for a year, the color red was so prominent, not just in the color of the city and the banners of the Roman Empire and whatnot, but the bloodshed and the brutality of the Roman Empire. And I also became particularly fond of sealing wax, which the relics are sealed with. So that the color of these internal duplicity is the name of the whole installation. And it's some of them are, or a lot of them are imaginary architecture, except this one. This one is based on the Herzog and Demiron. I think it's a part of the railroad station in Basel, Switzerland.
And I love, and I'm assuming this is intentional, the seeing and unseeing, right? The opacity of the material you have used allows one to see that there is a form there and to make it out, but not to have real clarity about what's actually happening there before your eyes. I think there's one more shot, Jody, if you don't mind advancing one more. Thank you. And this also brings to mind, again, this clear interest in architecture that you have spoken about in multiple interviews and other contexts that very much played a role in many of your projects, including these, but also your earlier Magic Carpet Home series, as well as Mnemonic Architecture, which you referred to earlier. These are really complex.
Ooh, I think Jill froze.
Of these and your interest with architecture.
Jill, I think you might need to repeat that because you're frozen.
Okay, I think I'm back. Sorry, everybody. I'm having a bit of a Wi-Fi issue here.
We lost her again. I'm going to just step in for a minute. So if you can talk a little bit about the Mnemonic Architecture series. I know it was and the Magic Carpet Home from 1999, which was first created for the Ludwig Foundation and later versions created for the Bronx Museum of Art. These works also address the idea of memory and memories enshrined and encoded in physical spaces that we inhabit. What do you see as the power of architecture and how has it influenced or inflected your work?
Are you back, Jill? Maybe. Okay, so we're jumping into the Magic Carpet series and then Mnemonic Architecture. And the Magic Carpet series, I've done 3 of them. Was originally funded by the Public Art Fund here in New York. And the first one done here, close to where I live, in Red Hook. And originally, not that I'm diverting about memory and architecture, but the importance of placing public art in certain parts of our city, the transformational power of art. Red Hook is a lot of projects and financially challenged communities, and nobody was placing public art there. I mean, we see them in front of Rockefeller Center. We see them at the entrance of Central Park, on Park Avenue. And, you know, I think the transformative power of art needs to spread out more with more equity. So the desire to put Magic Carpet Home here was the beginning of it. And the buildings behind the park are the public housing projects, Red Hook West. And so I wanted to bring out into the open the floor plans, and these are made on a 1-to-1 scale, so that the public would see where I live, where things happen. And so that was the beginning of the Magic Carpet projects. And after doing 3 or 4 of them, then I went back to, this is the one in LA, and we recently recreated it for home, so different, so appealing. That was at the LACMA in 2017, part of the Getty LA PST time. And after doing several of them, we were like, whoa, where did I live? And so that brought me into this, which is Mnemonic Architecture. And I was, after being away, leaving Cuba for 32 years, your memory is very, very fuzzy. However, I remember the first kiss with a girl, where it happened, in that house. And so that's the power of architecture that marks a very important part of your life. And so it was a chore and a project to try to remember the dimensions of the house. As it was, when I did visit it, it was completely wrong, but I decided to leave it as it was because it was about the memory, the 32-year-old memory of how I was imprinted on an 11-year-old and recalled 32 years later. And that's the important part for me, that it was the evidence of the passage of time. in the memory. And so the choice of materials became also significant because parts of the house were very clear. Parts of the house were fuzzy. I couldn't remember where the wall, where the door was, where the window was, anything like that. And so the material that I used was reflective glass beads, and it was lit in a certain way that you would only see segments of the floor plan as you walked along. You never got to see the whole floor plan at once, because I never saw it at once in my head either. And I wanted you to experience what it was like to remember something piece by piece.
What was the biggest distortion, if there was such a thing, in your memory? The thing that surprised you most when you went back to see it in real life?
The house was longer and narrower, and I remembered it the other way around, wider and shorter. So
Really
it's
interesting.
yeah, it was. So I left it like that.
I think looking at your magic carpets too, as well as thinking about this image, I mean, architecture is, and I think you said this beautifully, although I don't have the quote in front of me, architecture is an envelope for us, right? Our presence, our physical presence, our interaction with the spaces we inhabit is what really gives it meaning. Can you talk a little bit about the sense of meaning that you're trying to recreate? You've alluded to it very specifically in this project, but is there a kind of a meta desire you have to try to convey some of that sense of the body and space through your work?
I almost took it for granted that, you know, I leave the envelope in the morning, I come back in the afternoon. We do this pretty much all the time in the spaces that we inhabit. And I didn't used to think about it much until I was trying to remember where I lived. And then the architecture started signifying what had happened to me in those spaces. And so that also became the parallel of how my mind recalled it clearer, was because of the experiences that were associated with that. And so in using the floor plan, it's almost an extension of the memory of where we are.
What about place as opposed to space? You've lived in some really compelling places. New York, we talked about Rome. You were born and raised in your early childhood years in Cuba. You spent time in Basel as well. Talk a little bit about how those experiences have inflected your work.
I think inevitably the cities have made an impression on me, not just the difference in the languages, the difference in the people, the difference in the customs, but the difference in architecture. And I referred to back in the internal duplicity that one of those buildings actually exists. And that's the Herzl and de Meuron copper building by the train station in Basel. And so maybe because I'm not a figurative sculptor, this is as close as I guess to figuration, is using a floor plan. It's so annotated with factual spaces in a very minimal way. So, and this in particular, Nanny's house is also built to scale. And it was a project that I did in Honolulu, and her house was falling apart, and Habitat for Humanity ended up rebuilding it for her. So one of the things about economic disparity that I've been concerned with for a very long time ended up being part of this project as well, because I recreated the floor plan of Nanny's house on the grounds of the Contemporary Art Museum in Honolulu. And then I took the floor plan of the museum and put it in the park in the neighborhood where Nanny's house was collapsing, which is a very poor neighborhood. And so it's it's kind of like the two princes, the farmer and the prince, and it's a Jose Marti poem. And I think that that conversation through architecture has enabled me to address it, perhaps not so directly, but certainly for me anyways, with a poignancy.
I'm not sure if we have an image that shows this, but I do believe, and you can please correct me if I'm wrong, that the only annotation you have on your floor plans is C for closet. Am I remembering correctly?
Correct. That's in the Magic Carpet series. The closet was the only room that I labeled because it's like the work has so many layers that are pertinent to me personally. And also because it was a public art piece, I did not want to spell it out for the people who are going to approve the public art piece. That's the C was for closet. This was 1998 when I was submitting it for approval. And God forbid the community would say, oh my God, you're trying to turn all my children into queer. And it's sort of like, eliminate the explanation, but I left the C in there and that's what it would stand for. So yes, I did not label any other room. So yes,
very powerful.
And I don't, if you guys notice the little guy, I mean, they all look little because we're taking these photographs from an airplane. Or remember Alex at the American Academy, Jill?
Of course.
Yep, aerial photographer. I was in the plane with him taking these pictures. So he took these pictures, and the boy next to the arrow is actually sitting on the toilet of the floor plan. So we don't know what these kids were playing, but they were playing something. And that also happened in Red Hook, by the way. So kids know.
That's fantastic.
Kids know the little oval, what it means.
I don't want to be reductive, Maria Elena, in terms of, we've already talked about the hyphen. Now I'm going to talk briefly about isms, because I think that your practice really defies ready definition, nor do I think it's particularly helpful. But I do see the influence of minimalism and conceptualism in parts of your work and your approach to art making. And I wonder if your training, particularly at the graduate level at FIU here in Miami, as well as at FS State University, had a lasting impact on your later work.
It did. It really, those of us that have gone through formal art programs, and certainly the one at FIU and the one at SF State, are formal programs. And we're taught certain things by certain people. And most of my professors were white men, and the canon to look at was white men, Anglo. And so you cannot not help but being influenced by that. But once you start getting legs under you as a young artist, you start questioning it, you start, sometimes fighting it. And so then you discover people like Martin Prieur and Louis Bourgeois and Dennis Oppenheim and Eva Hesse. And then I feel like, those are my grandparents, artistic grandparents. So definitely they influence my selection and my predilection for minimalism, partly because I like the economy of aesthetics.
And what about your materials? Because you have a very, very broad palette, as it were, some really interesting materials. I have to confess, I had to look up things like rockite to find out what it was, and Duracal, Hydrocal, Delrin. These are things that are not perhaps so common on the captions for many art projects, but also there's glass and porcelain and paper.
Well, those of you that know me, that I don't like to go shopping for clothes, but I love being in the hardware store and in the material store. And so they speak to me. And when I look at the built environment around me, it speaks to me. It holds a certain history. Concrete goes back to the Roman aqueducts. And so I can't help but think that, or use them as a vocabulary. And so in certain cases, like rockite and hydrocal, when you cast them at a something that are tangible, when you clink them, they has a crystalline sound to them. So not that I'm making musical instruments, but because I've been working with sound for a while, I think dating probably back to the late 80s, the materials that have that quality, no pun intended, or maybe pun intended, that resonate for me. Like rockite. Rockite is great. It's like breaking glass.
Really? And I know that you have a version of clave that can be tapped together. Can we see that online? Is it video recorded anywhere where we could experience for ourselves what that might sound like?
The rockite? No, I don't. I haven't recorded the rockite per se. It's sort of like what I pay attention to when I select the materials for the particular project that I'm working on. In this case, I was making clave and a xylophone. And so even though they're not going to be played per se, it was important for me to know that the material has the capacity to have sonic possibilities.
Yeah, and we're going to stay with sound for a while now. And we're also going to come back to the pieces that you just referenced. But first, I'd like to invite you to talk about Tree Talk, which I know has consumed you for more than a decade now. And it's also garnered a lot of really well-deserved attention, including the grand prize in Ljubljana at the 30th Biennial of Graphic Arts. Talk to us about Tree Talk.
Coming back to place, I spent 10 weeks in Skowhegan, Maine, and I was surrounded by birches. And it was a very simple idea that visually the cylinder of the birch tree reminded me of a player piano roll. And it was a very simple, it's like, I wonder what it sounds like. Just be careful with those simple ideas because they grab a hold of you. And I worked on this for, I think, close to 13 years on the 3 birches. And then it was just the idea that kept on giving, because then I worked on works on paper. Then I collaborated with composers and using my works on paper as graphic scores. And so, and then I ended up doing an LP because they were more accessible than a player piano. So that's the short version.
And can you, Jody's, I know, going to show us some of these images of the different iterations of Tree Talk. Can you say a little bit about what we're looking at here?
You're looking at the culmination of the Treetop Series, which was a solo exhibition at the Mills Museum of Art in Oakland, Mills College Museum of Art. And I had finished all 3 trees, and it was curated with Stephanie Hayner, who is the chief curator and director there. And I also work with the 2 composers of the experimental music school there, which Pauline Oliveras founded. And that's kind of like the history of sound and listening is Pauline Oliveras. So it was a very special place and collaboration to culminate with.
And I know
and that's a whole tree. You're looking at a whole
incredible.
tree that I was mounted on the wall, where those panels were scanned and the lenticels were isolated to create the digital files with which to cut the piano roll with.
And we're going to hear a sample of what this sounds like, I think, right?
I believe so. Those are the 3 videos of my youngest fan,
Love it.
Tempo.
Oh, and that's Skowhegan, right? That's a view of.
That is the spot where I would sit in the morning with a café con leche, and the sculptures of the chairs are made with birch wood from Skowhegan, and it's projected so that the shadow, the memory of the chair is to scale.
It's terrific. Okay, here we go. So you now get to hear 1 minute of what a birch tree sounds like.
She had it before.
Sorry, I'm working on it. I don't know why it's not playing in this format. It was playing.
Yep, there we go.
I'm going to do it this way just to play it. I am not sure why. Well, it doesn't want to play that way. Sorry about that. Let me go back to where we were. We'll have to play it this way. Sorry. Let me turn that off so everyone can see it.
Thanks, Jody. Maria Elena, were you surprised the first time you heard the trees?
Amazing. I mean,
Amazing.
it was, I didn't know what I was going to hear. And I have to thank Lowry Sims because she invited me to be part of the exhibition she curated at the Museum of Arts and Design here in New York called Against the Grain, Wood in Contemporary Arts, Craft and Design. And I took her to hear it for the first time when I had the first piano roll cut. We went to somewhere in Queens to have it played. I mean, there's not many people with player piano. So we ended up really far into Queens to hear this. And we sat down and Randolph played it for us. And Lowry and I just looked at each other like, it sounded like jazz, experimental, atonal jazz.
And what about
Taylor.
the musician who was helping you? What was his response when it first played?
Well, actually, he's not a musician. Randolph was a collector of player piano rolls, player pianos, and cash registers. And his house was full of them. Like he had to make room for Lowry and I to sit in order to hear him play it. And interesting, when musicians do hear it, depending on their generation, they are appalled because it's there's noise. But other people, like Randall was just not, he was not judgmental, and he heard it, and we played it several times actually at that setting.
Now, you did work with musicians. Well, your show was on view at Mills College. I think that was 2018.
2018.
2018. You worked with Don Ivers and Mark Zollinger. Tell us about how they engaged with Tree Talk.
Completely. I mean, they come from the experimental school, and graphic scores is sort of like part of their everyday language. And when we started talking about collaborating without seeing any of my works on paper or the bark or anything related to the tree, we said, okay, let's do a studio visit. And when John walked into my studio, he says, your whole studio is a graphic score. So, and the same thing with Mark. And so we work very closely together, and they use some of my own files for their markings to put together, and they approach it very differently. John took tree number 2, and Mark took tree number 3, and they completely approached it differently. John treated the tree like the 4 seasons. So there's the winter, summer, fall, and spring. And Mark treated it as an electronic composition that was blown apart and put back together. And with different ensembles when they were played. I mean, one ensemble had 7 or 8 people, and the other one had 12 people.
And I think that since the Lowe is also on a university campus, this kind of interdisciplinarity, cross-curricular engagement is hugely exciting. Happy to learn about this.
For me, it was just a conversation going across different disciplines is so. I mean, we don't live in a one discipline world.
No, especially these days. So these, I know, are images of your LP. We can't get this though, right? We can't. This is not in wide release yet.
It's not. It got to my house when I was teaching online in April of 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic, and so it just everything has been pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. That we haven't actually had a formal launching yet.
It's quite beautiful as an object. It actually plays though as an LP too. Yes,
yes, it does.
Love
yes,
it.
It does. And it's a very heavy object.
Yeah.
I had it made in a heavier weight than your normal LP, and it's translucent.
Amazing. So time is galloping by. I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about the works that you have on view right now in Beyond the Sounds of Silence. I also want to acknowledge and thank Luna Curatorial Collective, who I know are with us this evening. Adriana Herrera and Willie Castellano curated this beautiful show. If you're local, even if you're not local, but plan to be in Miami, even if you don't plan to be in Miami, make a special trip. I promise you it's worth it. It's really very, very beautiful. And you have 4 works on view in this exhibition. In fact, as one enters the show, your works are the first that one encounters. So let's take a quick look, and you can tell us what's happening here. These are turn 2, which are related very much to Tree Talk, I believe.
It is after working with sound for so many years and having been a maker all my life, I grew up 5 doors down from the carpentry shop. I was missing the making and the materiality of building something. And so I wanted to bring the sound back to the tree trunk. So thus the cylinder. The cylinder has been a prominent shape, I would say, since 2005 or 6 in relationship to the piano roll, in relationship to the trees, and now in relationship to these sculptures. And so, and then the next one would be clave. And like I mentioned before, if you play them like a clave, like the instrument, it does have a very resonant, crystalline sound to it. But I don't encourage people to do it because they're not made for that. So
please don't do it at the Lowe. Please do not pick these up. But I also, in doing some research, María Elena, what's so so amazed at the level, the layers of meaning. I mean, the title doesn't seem so complicated, but in fact, it's really complicated because clave means key. It's also the clef sign on a musical score, and it's also instruments, percussive instruments, as you were saying, that you tap together. And I think that really, to my mind, is quite emblematic of your work. Even things that seem quite minimalist and reductive, and I don't mean that in a derogatory sense at all, just very, very clean and crystallized, have so much depth and richness to them. What about your xylophone, chromatic scale?
Well, chromatic scale, coming back to duality, language has played such a large umbrella with which to navigate. I'm a native Spanish speaker, then I learned English, and then I learned French, and then I learned Italian. Then I did a little bit of German when I was living in Switzerland. So the phonetics and the sound of language has played a lot, in selecting titles, in using the sound of how something is said. So chromatic scale, which is this little instrument that musicians use to tune. But to me, it's a visual scale and color. So I did that fun of playing with the instrument, the color, and the wording of that little tool. And
black and white, and obviously gray as well, are the only non-colors. They don't live on the chromatic scale, right? On the color scale, as I understand it, on the chroma scale. So there's that twist as well. I'm not an artist. You can correct me.
I don't work with color.
Let's look at Gitram from 2016.
This one is a curious piece because I had a lot of scraps of this wiggle wood from doing turn 1 and turn 2. And I was finishing tree number 3, preparing it for scanning and whatnot. And I got the Drescher residency in Oakland. So I gave me their studios, and he is a musician and a composer that makes his own instruments. So this is actually inspired by Paul Drescher, and I made the pieces at the workshop, and the little filaments that are coming out of the yellowish putty, it's actually from the bow of violin. And the Delrin was part of the scrap pile. So, and the screw, he doesn't know any of this. So it's sort of like, if some of the stuff was missing, well, it ended up in the work.
And I think that repurposing, recycling, reusing of materials is really important too for your more recent work. I know that you have a really firm commitment to safeguarding the environment, as well as conservation efforts, both of art and otherwise. And you really made a statement in 2018. Again, you can correct me, when you were at AI. I'm doubting myself. AI, thank you. And you decided that you wanted to be the first zero waste art school in the world, in the country.
In the country. Let's keep it modest.
You were starting small.
Yeah.
What did zero waste mean?
Well, when I started teaching there in 2014, especially in the beginning sculpture classes, the amount of wasted materials that the students would they would like cut this piece of an 8-foot 2x4 and throw the larger part away. And I'm going like, that's unbelievable. So it started accumulating to the point that, by 2018, and I think working with the trees, and what did it sound like? It's more about the music. And I think if there's any code that the trees were communicating, it definitely told me to scale back on material consumption. And so this particular piece on the wall is a garbage wall. These are all pieces of paper that were the throwaways from the parts that were glued to the rubbings and whatnot. And the cardboard was where the bark came shipped with. And so this was like, it was going to be thrown away or recycled. So I made the sculptures, I photographed them, and then it went to the recycle pile. So I don't even have them. I can't even sell them because there's nothing to sell. They're gone. And that got me to thinking, like, wow, that's a pretty economic way. It sucks economically, but it's like, and Fred is here and going like, yeah, María Elena, I got nothing to sell. So, but there is something about it that kept gnawing on me, especially as a professor, and Tony Labat is here as well. He sees it in our students and what materials they need or don't need or they use and ends up in the dumpster at the end of the semester. So I really wanted to make a difference in, let's make it a goal. Let's make it, carbon neutral by 2035. And we did end up getting that. The irony of it is that SFAI closed July 15th for good. And we had just gotten a grant from the Frankenthaler Foundation for Climate Initiative. And they have to give it back because now there's no campus to make carbon neutral.
And I also do, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And so when the school first closed in 2020 and I was on campus by myself, then I started the Repair series, which will end up being the solo show in May here at Herschel and Adler. And I've, that now that there's been a little bit of time that I was putting together the broken parts that the students left behind and stuff that I got out of the garbage that didn't end up in the landfill. It's sort of like, it's a form of healing. And
Which
they're
I think
really
is
beautiful.
All the more poignant given what's happened at SFAI. And I do just want to give you a shout out too, not only for the Herculean efforts I know that you led in terms of trying to save the institution effectively, but also for those of you who don't know, there is an incredible Diego Rivera mural in one of the main buildings there that you, María Elena, really, I think, had a leading role in ensuring that the work was beautifully conserved, a project that just wrapped up as the institution unfortunately unwound. But yeah, your work there has been remarkable on many different levels. I could talk forever. When I sent you my questions originally, you said we could write a book. So I really could talk to you or listen to you forever, but I want to open it up for some questions from members of our audience, if that's okay with you. And audience members, if you haven't seen the prompts from Jody, you can go ahead and type your questions into the chat.
We do have a couple of questions already, so I will read them to you both. One question is, in your mnemonic house, was there a distortion in scale because you experienced the original space as a child? I think you sort of alluded this to a little bit, but I guess they want you to expand upon that if you can.
I did, because when I did the floor plan from memory, I was certain that this was the way it was. And I didn't question it because that's the way my memory remembered it until I actually went in person. And then I saw, man, the proportions are completely reversed. And so I think by now we probably all know that we can't trust our memory because it distorts it. And every time that you recall something, that moment that you recall it also alters it.
Thank you. Another question is, I think you talked about this a little bit too, but they say there is a long history of linking the body with architecture. Can you talk more about the relation between sexuality and architecture? Specifically, I'm thinking about the use of externalizing the internal.
Wow. That's a great question. And I think because the interior of the home, not even the house, the home, is where so many of our emotions and our lives take place, rather than a house. A house is the architecture, but a home is the ones that we inhabit. That's where we live. That's where we sleep. That's where we make love or fight or eat and whatnot. This is where we create our lives. And so in particular, putting the sea in the closet as a metaphor. I mean, we talked about probably not so much anymore because things have changed so much, except in Florida. And don't say gay, but I say gay. And marking the closet was precisely because of that, because these, pulling things, sweeping things under the rug that you don't want seen or talked about, the skeletons in the closet, being in the closet. And so our language revolves around architecture in a way when we talk about in these kinds of terms.
Thank you for addressing that. It's so powerful. I think about, why it's so hard for anyone to leave a home or a place because of your memory. And Justin says, there's so much archaeological in your work, and the chromatic scale to him looks like carbonized papyrus scrolls from Pompeii. It's like seeing how they transformed as a result of the eruption of Vesuvius.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty cool comment. Adriana Herrera, one of the two curators from Aluna Creative, our co-curator of Beyond the Sounds of Silence, wants to know if you could address the relationship between memory and the possibility of being opening the present to new sensibilities. So the relationship between memory and being open to new sensibilities. Am I reading that right, Adriana? I'm not sure.
I'm wondering if at this point we could unmute everybody so that the questions could be verbal instead.
Let me unmute Adriana here. There you go. You want to say it, Adriana? Sorry.
Yeah, because you work all the time with memory. Memory is a constant that goes through the entire artwork that you have created. So I am memory in certain way is related, of course, to the past, but I do think that you are trying at the same time, not only to make us hear, for example, the narratives hidden on the skin of the trees, but to open up the present to new visions, sensibilities, to hear another type of languages. This is my question.
Right.
Yeah.
In a way, I'm going to parallel it with Justin's archaeological comment, in the sense that one of the ways that I was viewing the code of the trees and the cylinder was in certain, you pull out a cylinder to see when was a drought, when there was a flood. And so this archaeology of geology tells us scientifically what's happened. And in a way, I was looking at the physical memory of the tree, or hoping or thinking that these lenticels held information that
Absolutely.
I might be able to decipher. I'm not a scientist, so I can't do it that way. And the visual parallel to the music role basically said you have to play it on the player piano to hear what the tree sounds like.
Yes.
And so I hear, now I hear it on my record player. And so, I mean, I don't know if as I mentioned before, this concern with preservation might be what the trees are saying. And they're all three different ages. You know, one of them was 60 feet, one of them was 40 feet, and the other one was really old and a lot shorter because so much of it had disintegrated. So maybe that's a romantic idea. I don't know, but that's for another talk.
This is what we need. We need to create alternate modernity that is the new dreams that are awaiting for us. And the new needs.
By the way, I also want to thank Adriana and Willie for curating this exhibition. Some of you have already visited it, and it's an amazing walkthrough, sound and silence, and not necessarily a chronology, but a way to experience the sound of the sonic, and sometimes in the silence, as part of that sonic that I'm very honored to be part of. So thank you.
And we too, absolutely, absolutely. It has been a privilege to have your artwork in our exhibition, definitely.
Shout out to Maria Martinez Cañas, wants to know what's next.
What's next? I was actually repairing some more things because now people are giving me their broken crockery, and so I'm still in the process of repairing. And I think, and I want to talk to, just briefly mention, because like I said that I don't work with color, and this was arbitrary, that the broken student work was white, and the only thing I had to put it together was a black epoxy. So everything has been black and white. And it does not escape me that that's the summer of Black Lives Matter. And I was living in Oakland, and 3 blocks down the street were the demonstrations in spite of the lockdown. So this repair and hopefully some sort of healing. I mean, we're still in the midst of this pandemic, and the who knows, we're going to be like getting out of this at some point, hopefully. But I feel that it's going to take a while to process this shit.
Absolutely.
Yes, and on that note, Julia was asking if the repairs project seems like a series, or if it was just a way to process SFAI's closure and the pandemic.
It's become a more than that, because it helped me not buy materials other than the epoxy to put it back together. So it's kind of like putting all my concerns into a very neat package for now. So I'm not putting things in the landfill. I'm repairing things. I'm repairing myself, and I'm getting an art show out of it. So.
Yeah, and I would say one final question, because we're a little bit over time. Don asks, he says, we're currently learning that plants do communicate chemically, molecularly in the atmosphere and in the earth. Sea animals, local toadfish communicate audibly, snapping shrimp, as well as mammals such as dolphins and whales. Your work suggests other interesting modes of possible communication amongst living things. I guess he wants you to comment on that. Don, I can unmute you if you want.
Certainly. I mean, I don't know how many of you have read the Hidden Life of Trees. And
I do. Yes, absolutely. It's important.
I read it after I did. I was working, because I'd read it, I think, at the end of 2017, I think. And I had gone through the 3 trees and done a lot of stuff with the listening. And when I do go up to Skowhegan again and again, and I do sit with the trees with nobody else, with a lot of mosquito spray, and just sit there for a while. And I do play the trees to the trees.
Oh, beautiful.
I don't know if that makes any difference, it doesn't matter. It's something that I need to do for the trees. I don't do it a performance to be consumed by the Skowhegan population or the participants at the school, but it's for the trees. And so I do, I mean, I've talked to plants for a long time. Just because, you know, you have plants at home. I talk to my plants at home, and so I have known that they hear and they listen. I just don't understand their language, but they definitely do talk to each other.
Great. So I know we're a few minutes over. I appreciate everyone is mostly still here because it's been such a really amazing conversation. And there's some other wonderful comments in the chat. And Julia Herzberg says she still has her original notes from your work with sound that she curated at the Museum of Hispanic Art in September 1990. Looking forward to seeing the exhibition.
Wow.
But I want to give Jill last words. Dr. Deupi.
Oh, thank you. I mean, my last words are really where I started, which is thank you. Thank you to all of you for tuning in. Thank you to Adriana and Willie, Aluna Curatorial Collective. And above all, thank you, Maria Elena, for not only being with us this evening, but for all of the good and all of the beauty you bring to the world.
Thank you, everybody. It's really warming to see you all here, you know, and not still be jaded by this format. But on the other hand, how wonderful it is that we can be, you know, talking to each other, listening to each other, you know, regardless of where we are in the country. And so simultaneously, you know, I don't know whose land this is, but thank you.
Beautiful.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And if you have a few moments to either click the link in the chat for a survey or use the QR code, again, we really appreciate hearing your feedback about the talk tonight. And there will be lots of other programs, both in person and virtual, to support Beyond the Sounds of Silence coming up. So we hope that you will also consider joining the Lowe. And if you're interested in doing that, it directly supports those programs. There's the QR code for membership, or you can join our email list to find out what's going on, whether you're local or not. So I want to thank Maria Elena González and Dr. Jill Deupi for all of their time, as well as Adriana Herrera and Aluna Curatorial and all the staff who are behind the scenes working on today's program and the exhibition. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your
Thank you, Maria.
day or night, wherever you are in
Thanks,
time.
everyone.